I was on Twitter recently, big shocker, but I had a conversation that I thought was kind of interesting about who plays video games. And the context of this being, well, female protagonists in video games don't sell as well because there's more men playing video games than women, which I thought was kind of odd because I remember back in around 2016 or so, I saw a study that said basically that men and women were fairly equal in the video game market. So I wanted to look into this a little bit more and see where this claim was coming from. Now, I will give a couple caveats. First, I'm not a statistician, so you can take this with a grain of salt. I will not be offended if you don't come to the same conclusion I do. Second is that Statista does not publicly share their survey methodology. You have to pay money for it, and I'm not paying $150 a month to find out. I'm sorry. If you want to give me $150, maybe I will, but it's paywalled, so it's hard for me to find this information. And third, none of these surveys appear to mention any non-binary people who are neither men nor women, so this is what I have to work with, unfortunately. But with all that said, we're just gonna look at a particular set of studies that I found online. There's probably plenty of other statistics, but these were like the main ones I found. So let's get into the video. Side note, I love how in 2022 they just said more than 45% of gamers were female, which makes not a ton of sense. Like, where's an actual percentage here? Did they just, like, give up on counting? So you may be asking, well, why this site? Because it seems like they get most of their information from Statista. And like I said, Statista paywalls a lot of their methodology, but here's the reason why I'm using them. So Statista does a fairly wide range of studies when it comes to the video game industry, or really many industries, but we'll be using video games obviously for this. And Statista says about where they gather their information. We use annual financial reports of the market-leading companies and industry associations, third-party studies and reports, survey results from our primary research, e.g. the Statista Global Consumer Survey, as well as performance factors, e.g. user penetration, price per product, usage, to analyze the markets. So you've probably noticed by now I've made a couple references to survey methodology, and you might be thinking, well, Shannon, they gather their information from a wide range of sources. Which, yes, to a certain degree, but gender-specific information is not gathered off of the major platforms. At least I hope not, unless the major platforms are gathering information in a kind of nefarious way. Because I've never, ever entered my gender identity into Steam, and I'm pretty sure most of the major platforms don't ask you for that information either. They're asking you for things like billing information, which is where your, geolocation is, and of course, making sure that you're not a German buying, Nazi-related games or things like that. But yeah, the only way that they would really be able to gather gender identity information is via survey. And again, because I can't find the methodology for those surveys, I don't know how they're gathering that information. Also, even if these major platforms were gathering gender identity information, we haven't always had those platforms. In fact, those are probably only about a decade or so of information, if that, and video game history goes much further back. Like, we had to go to GameStop and brick-and-mortar game stores, and I don't think those stores were gathering gender and age information. It also seems that many statistics about gaming in recent history seem to be more US-centric, which I think is a huge problem because the US is hardly the biggest consumer of video games. It's Asia, it's China, and so I think that people need to make sure that they are counting the entire world when they talk about video games. Okay, so now that we've gotten our qualms about the total number of gamers and the makeup of those gamers out of the way, let's talk about correlation. It has been said by pretty much every game development professional that I know that a game that is made for everyone is a game that is made for no one. So you have to pick a target audience for your game, is what I'm saying. And that can vary from game to game, from genre to genre, and from publisher to publisher. Because these target audiences will fluctuate from game to game, genre to genre, publisher to publisher, I don't think it's very accurate to take the total number of players and apply them to every single game's total units sold. I would say that probably the only basic demographic that games companies are probably paying attention to at this point are age, only for ratings purposes. Other than that, I don't think most games companies give a fuck about who actually buys their games. They want units sold, and that's about it. They are leaning on existing IPs and certain gameplay elements, or, comparisons to a certain genre. There's Souls-likes and Metroidvania games and all sorts of different things that will appeal to gamers way before ever talking about what gender your players are. So I'm recording this the day that Gamescom did their opening showcase, and actually one of the biggest things that I seem to find AAA companies doing, because they've been established for a while, is they lean on brand recognition and IP recognition. There was a Diablo 4 DLC, there was another Sid Meier Civilization game, there's an Indiana Jones game, which is not necessarily a games series, but obviously a well-known IP from the movies. And you also had things like a Dark and Darker mobile game, because Dark and Darker is pretty relevant still, I assume. All the sorts of things like that. These are all companies that have been well established, and they don't need to appeal to gender to sell their games. They just need to appeal to the fact they're making another entry in a series that you already like, so just give them your money. Editing Shannon here. I think I forgot this when I was doing my recording, so I'm putting it in here now. The total number of units sold does not correlate to the total number of gamers, because, let's face it, how many of your moms bought you GTA 4 when you were a kid, or something like that? The people who buy the games are not necessarily the people who will always end up playing the games. So it's important to keep in mind that those total number of units sold also can mean things like somebody bought the game more than once because you bought a copy for yourself, and maybe you bought a copy for your friend, so on and so forth. There's a lot of different activities that can contribute to the total number of units sold, so I just wanted to make sure I put that in here because I think it's really important. So, remember how I told you that the whole thing that started this conversation was the assertion that male protagonists sold more than female protagonists? Let's get into that a little bit. Now, while it's true that some games have a lot of points of similarity, there may be at least 1 or 2 points of difference that could be really, really important, even if it's within genres. So, the comparison I was given in this conversation, and I will give to you, is the Tomb Raider series versus the Uncharted series, which do play, as far as I can tell, fairly similarly. I have never played either of these games, so somebody else may be more qualified to tell you than I could. But without playing them, but at least reading about the gameplay, they read as fairly similar games in terms of what they actually play like. However, I think that's only one part of the picture, especially when you're talking about total number of units sold, because that depends on the market. So, let's look into a couple factors that may have affected the way that both of these games sold. So, first things first, Tomb Raider, the very first one, released in 1996, and the first Uncharted game released in 2007. So already, you've had a decade of population boom, you've had technology improvements over time, even that affects both the platforms that gamers play games on and how game companies market their games, because now in 2007 you have a wider use of the World Wide Web. It was much easier to get a website up and running, which would have been your marketing at the time, and that was right around the time that social media was starting to exist. So yeah, you have that, and also things like release fatigue in the Tomb Raider series. From what I can tell, there was a release basically every year from the first Tomb Raider to 2007 when Uncharted released, and there was a release in 2007. The only years that were not any Tomb Raider releases were 2004 and 2005. But you've had 8 years of, at least, of games that have existed in the Tomb Raider series by this point. And so I can only imagine that there was a little bit of, like, series fatigue that existed. And while I did mention that, yes, brand recognition helps you with your marketing, it's only one piece of it. And like I said, I don't know how many people could, like, buy a game every single year in a series, even if you really, really liked it. So yeah, I imagine that may have had something to do with it as well. Now, like I said, because I've never played either of these games, most of this is speculation on my part. I imagine there are some differences that would make somebody buy one game over the other, but I couldn't tell you personally, but I imagine somebody would know, so if you do, feel free to drop a comment and educate me about it. There are so many factors that go into a game that make it a game, besides just the main character. Other characters, writing, dialogue, sound design, voice acting, music, art, the gameplay. There are so many different things that go into a game that will affect how you feel about it. And that can even go for games within the same series. For example, you may have noticed that I have a compilation on my channel called Wolfenstein: The New Colossus Cringe Compilation. I adored Wolfenstein: The New Order, which was made by Machine Games, and then The New Colossus I absolutely hated only for the fact that the writing made me cringe really hard. I bounced off that game really hard. Not necessarily because, I don't know, there was more women in it, but because I just found the writing really juvenile and cringy. So there's all sorts of things that can factor into what makes a game good for somebody and bad for another. And even though I found The New Colossus to be pretty cringe, there's still plenty of people who actually really liked it. Why? Because art is subjective and video games are art. That's the end of it. You're never going to really have a clue as to who will like your game and who will not. The only way I can really see proving this is by basically making the same game twice and forcing you to play as male in one and female in another, but you wouldn't be able to release this in a real market setting. Like, you would basically just have to do it in a study, which isn't really indicative of how the market would react. So I tend to reject the idea that you would ever really know for sure whether or not it's just the type of protagonist that is affecting sales numbers. I also would be curious to know how these statistics apply to games that have a character creator, Mass Effect being the example that comes to my mind first, because you can basically play the same game, but play one as male and one as female, and it would have absolutely zero bearing on your experience of the game, other than you hear Jennifer Hale as female Shepard, and I just think she's better. So, how did we get here? How did we get to this conclusion that is pretty incorrect about who plays games? Well, the very first thing I can think of is that, man, the video games industry just sucks at acknowledging women exist in general. The first thing that comes to my mind is Capcom. H-Bomber Guy covers this in his video about the Roblox OOF, where women in Capcom's music team would be credited under pseudonyms, or sometimes not at all. And even in games where their music was ported, it was credited to the person who ported the music, which often was a man. And I think that's pretty shit. Women have always been in the video game industry, but somehow they just keep going missing because they're not credited correctly. So it feeds into this idea that the games industry is a male-dominated industry. My second theory is that it's just vibes, which is a pretty weak argument, but from what I can tell in pop culture, most of the pop culture references to nerds pretty much refer to them as mostly men who play Dungeons and Dragons and video games and stuff like that. Very rarely do you see women participating in these activities in movies, TV shows, etc. We live in a society. It's also vibes. Now, I'm gonna just try not to get too preachy, but normative gender roles are still a thing. And this means that women are expected to be raising children and doing domestic labor like, cleaning and cooking, etc. We've gotten better about this as a society, I think, which is great, despite the manosphere existing and trying to tell us otherwise. But that means that still women face this quandary of, well, if you're spending all your time doing those other things, how do you have time to play video games? There also seems to be an allergy to just acknowledging that other platforms exist. Like, the mobile games part of the market is actually over half of the video games market at this point, and I remember specifically this person said, oh, well, this study that I had referred to earlier in the intro of this video had been like, it doesn't count because it counts a lot of women who play mobile games like Candy Crush, and I'm sorry, mobile games are still video games, and regardless of how you feel based on that, Candy Crush is owned by Activision, which is a video game company, period. I don't think there's really much more I can say on that topic other than mobile games are video games, period. Bring back Infinity Blade, by the way. Okay, I didn't want to talk about this, but also misogyny exists. Just look up any woman who's been in a Call of Duty lobby. I think you'll get the idea, but yes. Women experience really shitty behavior from men and also other women, let's be clear. And they tend to hide their identities because of that. It's just easier to not have to deal with that when you're playing something for a hobby, So, yeah, that's why women tend not to be as visible as men on most gaming platforms. And look, maybe one of these theories is correct, maybe some of them are correct, maybe all of them are correct, and maybe none of them are correct, but these are the things I can think of. To be honest, I don't think we'll ever actually really have a great answer as to how many men versus women play games. Even with the statistics that exist, there's too many other factors in play as to who buys games, who plays them, and why people play those games. Frankly, I'd love to have some more of that concrete information. I market for a small indie studio, and it'd be incredible for me to know the identity of who buys our games so that I can hone my marketing a bit to lean into that. But in a way, I think that may not be the best strategy either. If companies lean too hard into trying to appeal to the more basic demographics of people, they risk losing out on other markets they can make their game appeal to. I still mean what I say that a game made for everyone is a game made for no one, but often development and marketing are separate. Marketing can come up with different ways to make a game appeal to different types of audiences, sometimes some more effectively than others. But having some flexibility in that regard can help games sell beyond their initially strived for audience. And let's be real, at the end of the day, to most AAA companies, you're simply another unit sold. They don't really care who you are. They only care that you gave them $60 to pay a pittance to the devs and line the CEO's pockets. So yeah, that's the video. Hopefully it wasn't too long, but I just wanted to get this off my chest because I thought it was interesting. Hopefully you found it interesting. If you did, leave a like, leave a comment, or if you didn't find it interesting, you can leave a dislike and also leave a comment. I won't care either way. But yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye! Editing Shannon here. I'm just going to throw this in at the end because I don't think it'll fit very well in the other sections. But as I'm editing the video today, and I was scrolling through Twitter just to have a small break, and ran across this, which seems to be a hot mess. So basically the gist of this article is that there were 3 prominent accessibility advocates, including one who founded Can I Play That?, which is centered around accessibility information for video games, which is a really, really great tool. Hey, there's Doom, which I talked about recently. But yes, so there is that. However, the founder of this website never actually existed, which is fucking wild. And I'm trying not to be angry, but man, it's already really sucky when women have to contend with the idea that we don't exist much in the video game industry, either as developers or players. And now we have to contend with people who just make up women to advocate for us, which sucks. I'm just gonna be frank. This is a terrible thing to do, and this preys on people with disabilities. This is terrible, and it really, really sucks. Now, I can't speak for the good that Can I Play That has done for people. I am an able-bodied person who has never had the need of these services, but I'm sure there's plenty of disabled people who could speak to how that assists them. But yeah, apparently it was founded on a lie. This isn't to say that the information contained within these articles are lies, because I think that I'm imagining by now there's more contributors than just this one quote person. But yeah, it just really sucks that we had to make up women in order to get this across. And honestly, I don't understand why you would even do this. It would become more of an uphill battle to have women advocating for this rather than men. So, you know, given everything that we've talked about in this video. So, yeah, I'll leave the article link down below, probably in the description, but I'll also include it in my sources. But yeah, this really sucks. Please don't do this. All right, I'm going now. Bye.